And now, from the University of Virginia Center for Politics.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this special event hosted by the University of Virginia's Center for Politics. Our names are Celia Calhoun and
Ezra Tao.
And we are interns at the Center for Politics.
So first, we're going to introduce our moderator for the night, Paul Begala. He is a political strategist and CNN political commentator. He played a critical role as chief strategist for the 1992 Clinton-Gore campaign, later serving as counselor to the president in the Clinton administration. He is the former co-host of CNN's Crossfire and is the author of several books, including It's Still the Economy, Stupid. He is currently a research professor of public policy at Georgetown's McCourt School of Public Policy, but most importantly, he is a Center for Politics scholar here at UVA.
Thank you all very much. And thank everybody for being here. Thank you all. Let me do brief introductions of everyone, but first I really do want to thank the Center for Politics. Part of why I was delayed is I had to stop and say hello to Larry Sabato, who's a legend. But Glenn and Ken and everybody who works there, thank you for putting this together, for including me. It's just a terrific place. Let me introduce the students and introduce myself to them. Hamza.
Hello.
Hi there. Hamza's a fourth year. He's from Northern Virginia. Where in Northern Virginia, precisely?
Ashburn.
Ashburn, sure, okay, great. From Ashburn, Virginia, he's studying statistics and global public health. He's a member of University Guides, so he knows everything about grounds.
Sure.
Sure. Oh my gosh, and on and on. He's already done research at the School of Nursing and at UVA Health, among other things. He's been the chair of the university's honor committee and introduced important reforms after a mere 180 years, which, you know, for Virginia, that's pretty rapid. But congratulations for that. Virginia Pillion. Here you are. Hi.
Hi.
And where are you from?
I'm from Abingdon, Virginia.
Abingdon.
Yes.
Sure. Well, I'm glad you came here instead of the University of Tennessee.
Yes.
Much better choice. Virginia is, you're pre-law and media studies?
Yes.
Wow, that's great.
Thank you.
That's fantastic. And she serves as a leader in the Center for Politics UVAI project, which I'm terribly interested in, and is vice president of judiciary for the Inter-Sorority Council and leads as president of UVA End Overdose, which is pretty important organization. Lisa Koppelnick. Did I say it right, Koppelnick? Koppelnick. Rats. Sorry.
Okay.
Sorry, Lisa. You're from the Bay Area.
I am from the Bay Area.
Not the Chesapeake Bay.
No,
Is there another one?
the best Bay Area.
There you go. Whereabouts in the Bay Area?
I'm from the East Bay, from near Oakland, California.
Wonderful. Oh, outstanding. Well, why'd you pick UVA in the backyard of Berkeley?
I wanted to study politics. It was near DC.
Good for you. Lisa is currently the chair of the University Judiciary Committee, which leads the student-run body and enforces the 12 standards of conduct. She will also serve as a student member of the Board of Visitors.
Yeah.
That's really cool, and I'm very impressed. And I'm glad you're here.
Thank you.
Kathleen Flake is Richard Lyman Bushman Professor of Mormon Studies at the University of Virginia. She was appointed to the religious faculty where she teaches American religious history, the interaction of religion and law, and the origin and evolution of new and marginal religious movements. She's the author of a great many books. Where did you grow up? Where are you from?
My father was in the Air Force, so I grew up all over.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Oh, excellent. Rick Campanelli is a lecturer in ethics at the Batten School. Most of his career in the public and private sectors has been focused on human rights and human dignity. Trial attorney in the U.S. Department of Justice Civil Rights Division, where he litigated against unconstitutional conditions of prisoners and mental health patients. He's legal counsel to the U.S. State Department South Africa Working Group and worked on administration efforts to press for the end of apartheid. He was director of the Office of Civil Rights and counsel to the secretary at HHS, where he led the office that was charged with nationwide enforcement of non-discrimination laws in healthcare and federal welfare programs and protection of patient privacy. He holds a BA in economics and a law degree, both from UVA. And Jim Bacon, a lifelong career in Virginia politics, so far.
Journalism.
I'm journalism, excuse me, so far. I hate to say lifelong when you're just in the prime of life. He is a reporter for the Martinsville Bulletin and Roanoke Times, has been, and is editor and publisher of the Virginia Business Magazine and publisher of Bacon's Rebellion blog, which is a great name. He spent a brief time as the VP for publishing for the Boomer Project, specialized in marketing to baby boomers. He is also the father of a Gen Z son and 2 millennial daughters, thereby bridging this generational divide. So thank you all for doing this. If I may start with the younger folks. I love being old. I'm 62, so I'm at the tail end of the baby boom, and I do. You should try it. It's great. Because I say things like, when I was your age. Well, when I was your age, I was at the University of Texas, and the president was Ronald Reagan, and he came to our campus and had the biggest rally you ever saw. And I was a Democrat then and now. My father loved President Reagan. He said that. Were you out there? Did you see the president? I said, oh, I was there, Dad. Protesting, go home, old man. You know, he was at that time the oldest guy ever to run for president. Today, he would be a spring chicken. But I looked it up. After that rally, not because of that rally, but that was going into the 84 Reagan re-election. He won 18 to 24-year-olds by 61 to 39. He won a landslide, the oldest guy up until that time to ever run, won a landslide among them. Guess what? That's my age cohort. I was not with them politically, but the folks that I grew up with, and they voted 61-39 for Reagan as young people, guess what? They just voted 54-36 for Donald Trump. So there's this myth that a lot of this saying that a lot of old people will tell you. I'll start with you, Lisa. That, well, everybody is, Churchill supposedly said this, right? If you're not a liberal when you're young, you don't have a heart. If you're not a conservative when you're old, you don't have a brain. Turns out many generations hold their political views all the way through. Have you, I don't know if you're liberal or conservative, but do you have a sense that this is something you've really deeply invested in for a lifetime, your political views of today?
Yeah, so I grew up in a politically mixed family. My mom's a liberal, my dad's a conservative. And so I definitely felt like growing up, my dining table was like a debate room. And my brother and I have different political opinions, my parents have different political opinions, my grandparents have different political opinions. But something that we really valued as a family was just the fact that we could express those and still love each other and respect each other and learn from one another. And it was definitely a family that really respected and valued disagreement. I definitely think that my political views have evolved over time. I think that political views are shaped by the environment that you're in, and I think it's been really interesting coming from the Bay Area to coming to UVA, into a swing state, and just hearing from more of politically diverse students. And I think that's definitely shaped my politics today. So I think that politics evolve and change, but core values really, I think, stay for a long time.
That's fascinating. Kathleen, have you seen in your political life movement either by yourself or your generational cohort from right to left or right, or has it been pretty consistent all the way
I don't
through?
know that I can speak to my generational cohort.
Why not?
But for myself, I've been consistently Democrat all my life, even in my youth. But
So even when Reagan was running it up among young people?
especially when Reagan was running it up. Rick and I have already been through this. He was in civil rights at Justice. I was in civil rights at Education in that administration, and that just confirmed my commitment to Democrats to live through that experience.
That's fascinating. Let me actually ask you, Virginia. There's a sense that, I don't speak for my generation, but for a lot of old people, that we feel like maybe Lisa is an outlier, in that a lot of old people get the sense that young people don't want to hear anything that makes them uncomfortable. There's talk about safe spaces and trigger warnings and microaggressions and all these things that didn't exist like 20, 30, 40 years ago. Is there in your generation a celebration of political diversity as well as all the other benefits of diversity?
I think it honestly depends on who you're talking to when you ask that question
That's
and where
why
you're
I
at in
asked
the
you.
world. I think there's always room for growth and there's always room for more open discussions. But I I do see that there's a fear to speak out about political beliefs when you're in a crowd of people that don't necessarily agree with you, but I think it makes us stronger in our beliefs in a lot of ways, and knowing how to back yourself up and why you believe the things that you do and why you hold the values that you do. And I think those debates that do get a little more heated, or sometimes while they're uncomfortable, they can be productive because they make you question why you believe the way you do.
Wow, that's great. May I ask your political leanings?
I'm a conservative.
You're conservative. Is this a liberal or conservative campus?
From my perspective, I feel that it's a very liberal campus, but I don't know how others feel about that.
And have you found that others are okay with that, who don't share your views? You say it's made you strong, but to deal with people who have different views.
Sure. I mean, when I first came to UVA, I came from a very conservative area, and I grew up in a conservative household, and I knew I believed the things that I did. And then coming to UVA, it definitely made me realize, oh, maybe I need to research a little bit more why I feel the way that I do. And I spent some time in DC in high school working for the opposite party as a Senate page, and while there, I realized, oh, it's not just because my parents told me to believe this way. I really do feel this way, and I think that's an important growth that all people have to go through. But coming to UVA definitely was a challenge at first to speak out about my beliefs, but it did, like I said, make me stronger in why I believe the way I do and being able to back myself up.
That's great. Hamza, have you got friends who have different political views from you?
I think some. I think most of my friends are liberal, like I am, and I think to know that like some of my like friends might be a conservative is so fine, and I kind of would be shocked if that would be kind of a reason why someone doesn't befriend someone. I think often politics just don't come up on a day-to-day conversation, so I might have friends that are conservative, and I don't know they are. I think.
And when you do, are they still your friend the next day?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
I think politics have become so polarized, and I think people might internalize that polarization in terms of I don't think Virginia has ultra-conservative beliefs, or she might have, she might be fairly central, and that's fine. I'm not going to assume that from anyone. But I feel like it's easy to make that assumption when you internalize that polarization and you think everyone is so far on the spectrum, which is probably not the most mature thing to believe.
Well, Jim, covering all this, I mean, I do think, Hamza, that's an admirable quality. I can tell you statistically, Gallup has tracked this for 60 years, and the percentage of Americans who have said they don't want their child to marry outside their race has collapsed. The percentage of Americans who said they don't want their child to marry outside their religion has collapsed. The percentage of Americans who say they don't want their child to marry outside their political party has gone from 4 under JFK to 45 today. So in your career, have you seen the political becoming personal and even more intense?
Well, absolutely, and in my personal life as well. It is kind of funny human beings are by nature are a tribalistic species. And the nature of being a tribal species is that you draw distinctions between in-group and out-group, and that you tend to make invidious judgments about the out-group. Right. And what we're seeing in America today is a massive rewriting of what the in-group and out-groups are. And the invidious distinctions and invidious comparisons and the kind of the various kind of animosities really aren't going away. We're just kind of redrawing the lines. And so to the extent that, with my children, my family, my wife, I mean, it's kind of like things have kind of like shifted around a lot in terms of our opinions. And I've definitely seen that shift.
Kathleen, have you, and I mean, I celebrate, I love diversity, including of politics. I was the best man at James Carville and Mary Madeline's wedding. They've been married for 30 years. It works. They couldn't be more intensely opposite politically. But right now, the percentage of marriages outside of your political view has collapsed to single digits as well. Have you seen that?
Sure, I've seen it in the data. I personally am not surprised by that because political issues have become more existential. The environment, the economy, democracy versus fascism, that's a lot bigger than most political campaigns have been about in my lifetime. And like I said, I'm a boomer, so I'm not surprised by this because it doesn't. The interests have shifted. It's not politics in the abstract. It's the moral and existential questions that are in front of us.
That's a really good point. And I do think both parties see that. When Trump was president, I had a friend who was working for him, and I said that, why don't you just go down there and cut some deals? You could actually get your infrastructure bill. Chuck Schumer is the politician to whom Donald Trump gave more money than any politician in his career back when Trump was a Democrat. I said, go see Schumer, cut the deal. And this guy said, you don't understand. I said, whoa, okay, you're right, I don't. He said, we believe we're on the edge of a cliff, and you want to go 100 yards forward, and you think it's compromise to go 50 yards forward. Either way, we're dead. I was like, dude, build some highways. Like, let the kids in Flint drink water that doesn't kill them. Like, I don't see, but some of these things, you're clearly right, are existential. But Jim, it used to be that politics turned around, this sounds so naive, around doing the most good for the most number. And we could have an argument about that. Maybe we need more roads, maybe we need more bike paths, right? We'd have that argument. But it seems to me that one thing that's really changed is it's no longer you're a good person with different ideas. It's maybe because Kathleen's point, it's so existential. It's now not, I think I'm right, I think you're wrong. It's, I think I'm good, I think you're evil. And we must not compromise with evil.
Yeah. Well, I think that last point you just said, I have a good friend who's a former congressman, and Bob Inglis, you probably know him, and Bob,
South Carolina. Right?
Yeah, and Bob has come to my class and he's talked about this. He said the very thing that somehow, I know things are really important. I agree with Kathleen, but I think, and I think partly getting back to the generational differences, the way we receive information now so quickly in snippets. And because everything is vying for all of our attention, one way to vie for our attention is to say everything is existential. And everything is not existential. But we do say that all the time. And so there is a constant, I think that creates a great cynicism. And it also means in relationship that if we go around with just a short little, I heard one thing, like Kathleen said correctly, that I was in the Civil Rights Division and a trial attorney in the Civil Rights Division. I bet you have an idea of what you think my politics are. Well, I'm conservative. I was in the Reagan administration. I ended up working for Ed Meese. But you could easily take any of those lines and say, oh, I know that guy. And but a danger of our situation now, I think, is all of us, but because I think younger generations have grown up with having a much smaller batch of information or a greater volume of information, but selecting smaller snippets that they've gotten used to rely on, that there is an anger that's rising from just not looking thoroughly or giving people a chance to say, oh, this is what I mean. And that's a concern I have. It's a concern I have in my public policy class. So, and I think that gives rise to this I'm right and you're evil mindset, and that's all I've heard.
It may be literally one of the reasons I was detained, because I did want to stop and see Larry. One of the observations he made, looking at his career, is that generations ago, we all grew up watching Walter Cronkite. And in a country maybe half the size, he had 25 million people every night. Okay, David Muir has the biggest broadcast now, maybe it's 4 million. At a country of 335, maybe he's got 6. Sorry, who cares? I mean, 335 million people. We did have agreed upon facts, we older folks. And at the risk of being personal, I want to ask everybody, I'm going to start with Jim. What's your either favorite or primary source of news and information?
Well, the source I read every day is the Wall Street Journal, but I also subscribe to the New York Times and Washington Post. Don't read it as much, but I feel like you gotta have it. You gotta have access to it. I'm conservative as well. I have a lot of conservative news aggregators that I read, but you know, a lot of stuff is just. We all live in a world where everybody is forwarding stuff to everybody else. So a lot of what I read is, hey, did you see this? Did you see that? And that can be a whole wide variety of sources. And of course, as a journalist, I mean, one of my jobs is to go out and just like dig, and not just rely upon what everybody else is saying, but try to build my own base of knowledge.
Great. Virginia, where do you go for news?
I get the Politico playbook in my inbox every day and try to read through that and see what the headlines are. And then usually from there, I'll kind of Google those headlines and read whatever pops up and try to make my own interpretation of it and based on discussions with the people around me.
Wow, fascinating. Kathleen?
Several newspapers, but I try to look for what I would call a primary source. So I often go on YouTube and look for speeches, statements, things like that I can evaluate for myself. But I do have it mediated to me through the Times, the Post. Sometimes I look at the Wall Street Journal, and I really try sometimes to watch Fox just to keep myself honest and see if they're being represented correctly as they're mediated by these other news.
I have a joke that I always tell my friends who work at Fox, because I work at CNN. I'm also a faithful Catholic, and I always tell them, I do two things every day. I read the Holy Bible and I watch Fox News because I want to know what both sides are thinking. It's a joke. It's a joke. I have a lot of friends, not a lot. I have a few friends over there. But I think that's admirable that liberals seek that out. Okay.
I read CNN every day. I read the Times as well, and I'm an econ major, so I read The Economist sometimes to get data. Yeah.
I don't do any TV or streaming stuff. And that's partly because I think it's impossible that we can have breaking news every minute of the day. And then so my sources are, and I do this because I'm also doing it for my class as well. Right. I read the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal. And when I present articles for the class, I sometimes, just for the fun of it, put up the two headlines of the story. It looks like it's two different stories. But I read those. I read The Atlantic. I read, I try to find sources that are a little off. Like there's the Tablet magazine, which is a relatively new publication, at least to me. And I try to find sources on science and technology that usually I try to find them from various sides because I think they're usually coming from various sides. So.
And Hamza?
Yeah, just echoing everyone. I think the Times is my go-to every day, every morning. I'll randomly click on it throughout the day when I'm boarding class.
Never.
And then I think social media as well. I mean, I'm on social media always, and part of what's kind of being put on my screen when I'm on social media, aside from what my friends are doing, are news outlets being reshared and reposted.
Okay. What social media are you on? Again, you don't have to answer any of these questions, but I'm terribly interested, and I do think it helps me, it helps us understand.
I say Instagram and X.
You're on Instagram and X, the former Twitter.
Yes.
Social media.
Yeah.
Okay,
Twitter.
Instagram and X. Rick, can I ask you, do you use social media? If so, which one?
Not for news at all. I don't.
No, but at all.
I use Instagram because my son's in a famous band, and that's where I find out news about.
Excellent.
But I actually don't, at least for news. I use it for family things.
Right.
I'm on Instagram. I'm on Facebook to look at my dad's Facebook posts. I'm also on TikTok and Snapchat, but I don't think you get the news from Snapchat. So.
But you do sometimes get news from TikTok.
Yeah.
How do you feel about the movement to either force them to sell or shut down?
Yeah, I think the privacy concerns are really important. And I wish that we were able to have more information that was made public. But I also understand that there's information that can't be shared with the public. But I do think the privacy concerns and the data concerns are real.
Yeah, vis-a-vis who's getting the data from ByteDance?
Yeah, what data that they can get from our devices and from everything that we put on our profile and also what they're using that data for.
Right. The tracking and the facial recognition. Yeah, I mean, Kathleen, are you on any social media?
No, I have a strong commitment not to be. Yeah.
Virginia?
I don't know what social media I'm not on, unfortunately, but yeah, I try not to rely on it too much as a news source, and you know, I'll see a headline pop up and try to find a more reputable source before I jump to any conclusions on what I see.
Right, but no, I mean, this is part of the generational divide. It's like Kathleen's not on any of it, you're on all, but if you don't mind naming them, and then what you do get from that.
Sure.
I know you've already said you go to other media, news media for news,
Yes.
but there it is, and it's coming, right?
Yeah, I'm on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok. I'm on Facebook every once in a while, but yeah, I mean, all of them.
Wow.
I have two sources of news that I feel are totally unreliable, and I just never watch them. One is cable TV. Sorry, Paul. You know, it's all abominable. That includes Fox, even though I'm a conservative. And the other is social media. It's you know, it's hard for me to say this, but I would trust the New York Times, you know, over any of those sources because at least their information is a lot more carefully vetted. And yeah, so. You know, I'm just an old school guy who kind of, you know, believes in people who actually take care in fact checking and even, you know, spelling correctly and all the rest of it. Yeah.
That's, I think, a really important generational difference. Sorry, Lisa. We old folks came up with institutions that I think in the main we thought worked for us. There were problems, but this notion that everybody needs an editor. And that you may not like the political bent of the Wall Street Journal or Fox or CNN or New York Times, but you know somebody is there, at least trying, I think. I mean, I know because I work there, but trying to make sure they get it right. As opposed to X, TikTok, et cetera, where there are no filters. But I think that speaks to a larger difference between the generations, is that I've got 4 kids in their 20s, and they're just as political in the sort of best sense of the word. They're just as engaged in their lives. One of them is a graduate of this university, I will say. And yet they're less institutional, perhaps, than our generation. Do you find that?
By less institutional, do you mean like buy into?
I mean, like, I'm a member of the oldest political party in the world, the Democratic Party, the oldest Christian faith in the world, the Catholic Church. I've been married to the same one for 35 years. I mean, I am an institutionalist. And a lot of people aren't in your generation. Yeah. They'll say, I'm not religious. I don't want to go to church on Sunday, but I'm spiritual. And I'm sorry, you can tell I fight with my kids about this. Right, I'm political, but I don't want to be a Republican or a Democrat. Am I mischaracterizing your generation in that I see you all as wonderfully committed to save the world to the right or left or the center, but not wanting to do it through institutions?
I mean, I definitely think this is an internal generational divide as well. I think that there's people within our generation who really trust institutions and who see institutions as avenues for change, and also who are deeply devoted to their institutions, whether those be religious institutions or political ones. But I definitely think that a lot of our generation, and probably more of our generation than others, relies on alternative strategies to approach politics and other aspects of our lives. I think that is somewhat driven by social media just because we have so much more information about the world. And there's so much really passionate information, people are really into what they're saying and give biased perspectives on social media. But I think that really contributes to this idea that we don't really belong to certain institutions, or people want to protest, or people want to post, and people want to engage in politics outside of the traditional institutions that have existed. But I don't think that I think sometimes it can be over-exaggerated. I still think there's a large part of our generation that believes in political institutions, just anecdotally, but that definitely there's more outside of those as well.
Well, and I'm going to pick on Hamza because he's a guide. My son was in UGuides, and so I love that organization. And it just gives you such a richer experience because you're steeped in the history and tradition of what for America is a very old institution. And yet I think all of you as student leaders are trying to leverage that creaky ancient institution to do what you believe is in the public interest. Now that you're here, right? Would you rather have done that or gone to, some less? I'm trying to think of a not negative, less hidebound, less traditional, less steeped, a pop-up university. PragerU or TrumpU or whatever they. Definitely shut that one down. But.
Definitely not, and I think you're totally right in terms of like knowing UVA's history makes me more grateful to be a student here because like I see the positive and I see how students and administrators have like driven this university to where it is now, and I think, I knowing UVA's history like makes me value the space that I take up here. So yeah, I definitely think I wouldn't consider myself an institutionalist, but I love the institution of UVA. I also think on like the institutionalist conversation, like to me that sounds like labeling, where maybe like my generation is more hesitant to label. We don't want to label ourselves, political party, religion, whatever category that label is a part of. And we also don't want to label others, and maybe other generations find more comfort in using those labels. So like, I'm not sure if the numbers say this, then it's probably true, but I'm not sure if, my generation is as anti-institution. It might just be anti-labeling each other and not seeing the need to do that.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay, Virginia. Your age cohort is very liberal. I'll just tell you from the data, right? They voted, well, wait, I can tell you. 66% of young people voted for Barack Obama. Wait, I wrote it all down here. 55 voted for Hillary. 66 voted for Obama of young people. Yeah, young people are changing, right? But 66 voted for Obama, 55 voted for Hillary, 60 voted for Joe. You're Republican. They're watching. What are they doing wrong? How do we get more like, not we, the Republicans, I'm a Democrat, but how do they get more like you? What are they doing wrong?
That's a tough question. I think there's a lot of alienation by the Republican Party and oftentimes of marginalized groups, and I think that's definitely something that can be worked on, and I think there's a general assumption among young people that the conservatives, particularly the ones that we have in office now, are not as open to social issues that, such as like the LGBTQ plus community, and I think that our generation is a lot more open to different identities and open to freedoms and that idea that the older generation of conservatives are not, and I think that's definitely something that can be worked on is, opening up a little bit more to the younger generation and, understanding the viewpoints of that group. I mean, that's a really tough question to answer.
I think it's a great answer. I think you're really pointing the way. I think if whoever the new, I can't even think of his name now, the new chairman of the Republican Party, yes. I wish he would call you. I mean, for his sake,
yes.
Because I think he could learn from that. Kathleen, there's a generational divide in the progressive movement as well. I think, anyway. I mean, maybe I'm wrong.
You talk about institutions. I think that Lisa mentioned a word that's also important and possibly more important, or behind the institutional malaise, which I think is there. I think there's a distrust. You used the word trust, right, Lisa? I think there's a distrust of authority, and there are really solid grounds for that. The professions and expertise has been on a decline ever since the 1970s, right? So that it finally got to a point we couldn't trust the weathermen with the markers. I mean, NOAA couldn't talk back even on that, like where the hurricane's going. And so you look at that kind of compromising of expertise, agency expertise, governmental expertise. You have candidates openly lying, and there's no bottom. Somehow you can't find a bottom to that, right? It's just a repetition of that lying. And so why not turn to social media and everybody else's opinion if you don't really have if you don't have any confidence in the professional speakers, if the professional class is no longer trustworthy. Right. And it's certainly, I think, perceived as not trustworthy to handle their future, right? again, this gets, I know existential is overly used, but I think that those of us who've made it in a way beyond some of those real important, frightening moments of getting that job and finding yourself, if I just can't imagine what I would be thinking if I were an undergraduate in this era. And even something like Ukraine, I don't know why we cannot see the difference between giving dollars to Ukraine instead of our blood, because that to me is what it amounts to. And I don't know why. So I can, as you can see, I can get exercised on this. I would be interested in how interested Gen Z is in foreign policy. That's always been a weakness in the American voter, right? That sense, and yet it seems to be this is what Biden is spending 70% of his attention on. And yet he's trying to run on a domestic platform when I think, I don't know, you're the expert on this. I do trust experts, some of them. So I'm interested in that mismatch among the young and the older voter. And maybe, Rick, you see it in your classes, and I'd like to hear what others are thinking about the international setting in terms of American politics.
Rick, you want to comment on that, and then Lisa?
I think on that question about the international setting and politics, I think you're way more qualified to speak about this than I am. But I think the American voters tend to, for better or for worse, as you said, Kathleen. But what was your book? It's Still the Economy, Stupid. I mean, it's people still are most immediately concerned about what concerns them. And, as important as everything you're saying is, and the international, the uncertainty and increasing uncertainty in the international space and what that may mean for us, people are, I think, people are concerned. And my students, I think I teach, there's quite a few fourth-year students and graduating graduate students in my class. And, they're thinking, well, what are the job prospects? What is it that I can trust? And that's what they're looking to. And I would just say that you asked Paul when you started this question, you were asking, well, what generationally in the parties as we look across, I think there are some interesting and often confusing realignments going on. Like, for instance, there's these articles, and I'm talking about quoting in the New York Times, that are saying that there's a growing number of minority voters who are more inclined to Trump in this election. Now that breaks a mold. And I've been talking to my Democrat friends even after the last election, and a lot of them think, well, they're just fooled. And I think, well, it's not a good idea just to think people are fooled. And that there's a reason that realignment is occurring. And there's a reason that there are a lot of young conservatives are becoming disenchanted. And some of them are saying, well, because I can't find the conservatives. I can't find the real conservatives. So I think all these, I think it's worth diving down into generational differences. But I think there's actually some big realignments that are occurring among all generations.
Lisa, what year were you born?
2003.
2003. Every day of your life until 5 minutes ago, well, 2 years ago, we were at war. In Afghanistan, Iraq for almost your entire life.
20 years.
Afghanistan and Iraq. What has been your sense of those foreign conflicts, or has that not affected your politics or your worldview at all? I mean, I can't imagine what it's like to grow up in endless war.
Yeah, I think this really connects to the social media question as well. I think we have an unprecedented amount of information, direct information, source information from people all around the world. And I think that definitely impacts how we all see international issues, but I still think the educational issues about just foreign policy and the world in America are still prevailing. Like, I don't think that a lot of people are educated about the history of a variety of international conflicts. But I do think that our generation is passionate about international issues and really cares about international issues as well. And I think that's a large result of social media too, just because we have access to so much more information and perspective.
And which way is that pushing you?
In politically?
Yes.
Well, I like Joe Biden. I think that Joe Biden has done a lot domestically, actually, and it's kind of interesting that a lot of the focus is international, but I think he's done a lot domestically in terms of addressing, gun violence, climate change, the infrastructure bill. He's done a lot domestically, and I think the Democrats could get better at marketing that and sort of talking about the things that he's been able to achieve domestically. But I think internationally, I think our generation needs some humility, honestly, because I don't know all of the facts about a variety of international conflicts and situations, and I struggle when you're sort of called to speak on something related to an international issue, just because these issues are so complex. And I think that our generation is, there's an assumption that we're supposed to have an opinion on those now, but it's really hard to have a factual and well-developed opinion on a lot of international issues when the education isn't there.
That's a great point.
So
Yes, Kathleen.
this is the issue, the complexity of these issues. I think that's not just your generation. These are complex issues, right? And this is where the problem of trust comes in. Most of us would defer to an expert on some of those questions, right? But I think we've lost confidence in the people who are supposed to have dedicated themselves to understanding that complexity. And so I wonder if the divide that, Rick, you're talking about that crosses left and right is, we've given up hope in fixing the situation, let's just kick over the table. Because if I can't eat at the table, you're not going to eat at the table, and we just kick it over. The table happens to be our politics, right? Our government, the state of our government. Yep. So let's just, somehow there's this illusion that you can go back to zero, start over. Let's do it right by kicking over what's in the way.
Well, particularly a sense of expertise, Jim. I am old enough to remember when we went to war in Afghanistan and Iraq. And Iraq particularly, our vice president, who had been Secretary of Defense, deep knowledge of national security. The president was pretty new, been the governor, but didn't have the national security background that the vice president had. And he told us we would be greeted as liberators, and they would embrace democracy, and that Iraq would be just like Wisconsin, but better winters. It would be like a well-run, functioning, friendly place. I'm sorry to sound bitter, but I'm very bitter. I can't imagine growing up in that. But I had a student who lost both his legs above the knee. Okay, he was a West Point grad. He saluted, and he was shipped out, and he thought it was a bad deal. He thought it was a dumb idea.
They lied to me.
And they lied to him, and it cost him his legs. And I really am bitter about that. And so I guess I can understand. I don't go from that, though, to say, therefore, everybody is wrong about everything. Therefore, I'm not going to listen to Dr. Fauci about a vaccine. I'm going to listen to a football player who did his own research. I think that's kind of what we've done. It's like we've shattered all expertise because some experts really did get it wrong on some important life or death decisions.
I would reframe a lot of these issues very differently from the way you framed them. But no, we would get bogged down and we go back and forth. There's an issue that I would like to talk about, not to seize the momentum from you, but there is the elephant in the room, to me, is the $34 trillion national debt. And we talk about generations. This is something that our generation and the silent generation and the greatest generation kind of piled up through the policies that we pursued. And I think it's almost everybody agrees that this is not sustainable in the long run. And when the bill comes due, who's going to be holding the bag? It's going to be the younger generation. This is a debt that we have saddled upon you, and whether you blame it on defense spending, you blame domestic programs, the law, not enough taxes, whatever you blame it on, we collectively have created this situation. And I'd be really curious to know what young people go, oh my God, that's $34 trillion debt. How much time do you spend worrying about that? And how long do you think it's going to last before the wheels fall off the bus?
And do you think it's an issue?
Or do you even think it's an issue?
Hamza?
I mean, I'm not an expert, but I don't think it is. Just because I've never lived in a world where the U.S. hasn't had an insane amount of debt. I wish I knew what the tangible negatives of having that debt were, or who's going to come collecting that debt one day, hypothetically. I can't conceive of an entity that would, but maybe that's just because I don't know what I'm talking about. But not speaking for my generation, but speaking for myself, I've never once worried about the national debt because we'll just add to it and pass it on to the generation that comes 2 generations below Gen Z.
Well, as President Reagan said when the debt was much smaller, but it was still huge, he said, well, it's big enough it can take care of itself. It was a joke, but...
But, I mean, and please correct me if I'm wrong in terms of, maybe that's the total wrong take, and I'll fold my hands real fast.
But Virginia, from a conservative student's point of view.
Yeah, I mean, I also am in the same perspective. I've never lived in a world where we haven't had a massive national debt. It's definitely, something that concerns me, and, having debt to other countries is something that was emphasized to me as a child, and kind of fearing that, and fearing, other countries that we owe billions of dollars to coming to collect, like China and places that we just aren't paying the bills, and that's never a good thing. But yeah, it definitely is something that concerns me, but I'm also not an expert.
Well, this is actually for everybody, because it's really simple. I mean, I have at my home a leather-bound copy of the 1997 balanced budget. When I worked in the White House, we had a budget meeting that I attended every single day of the year. Clinton was that focused on balancing the budget. And he said to me, I wasn't a budget nerd, I was a communications and political guy. He said, we only do 3 things in your government. We take in money, we send out money, we kill people. I do not want you into killing people business. I said, yes, sir. Okay, but it was very simple. We raised taxes, we cut spending. Okay, for most of our post-war history, 21% of GDP was spending, 19 was taxes, so we had the structural debt. We flipped them. And the world didn't end. I think, in fact, the economy boomed with higher taxes and lower spending. And in that budget, I've gotten it out recently, it was 1997, way out. So we had 0 deficit, operating deficit. We still had a debt. Way into the far future, 2013, the national debt would be 0. All we had to do is not have massive tax cuts and 20-year wars. And yet, now we have 34 trillion.
That's exactly what we did. Yeah.
It is what we did. I mean, that's just arithmetic. I mean, it wasn't housing the homeless that caused the 34 trillion.
I'll just say I beg to differ, but I don't want to get into debate over it. I just want to air the perspectives. But
it was there, though. I mean, it was in place. All we had to do was not screw it up.
Yeah, but what we both beg to differ about, I bet, is the set of causes for the, including, it's hard to get in our minds. We used to talk about $1 billion like it was a lot of money. Now we're talking about $1 trillion. 34 trillion. That is $1,000 billion. And I don't. This is why, Jim, when you asked your question, I said, and do you care? And do you think about the budget? Because I actually think this is a time bomb. And soon, when inflation picks up, it will consume. It'll be bigger than the discretionary budget of the United States.
It's bigger than the payment on the debt that we owe
on the debt.
Most of it to Americans, but a great amount, a huge amount,
but
to foreign countries.
Generationally, I think most people, you've never seen that bill come due. You've never seen interest rates of that sort. Kathleen was saying at one point we had 17.5% interest.
Right.
And so that will constrain so much. And so anyway, what I think this is a real generational difference. So that there's not an appreciation of that problem.
As an old guy, I strongly agree. But I think young people have a sense that maybe us old folks think young people don't understand and they don't care about the debt, the deficit. I think, I hate to speak for you guys, but I get from my kids, we don't know or care enough about the climate. When I talk to young people about existential stuff, they never talk about the debt, but they always talk about climate. Yeah. Is that right? Lisa?
I'm honestly the wrong person to ask about this. I think I'm like an outlier in our generation in that I really do care about the climate and I think it's a real issue, but I haven't focused a lot of like my political energy towards the climate. I do think that something that I struggle with is the idea that the climate could be a political issue, but I guess everything is a political issue now. And I think I get frustrated when the climate and other scientific issues become really political issues, and I don't think that that's necessarily our generation's doing. I guess that's what I'll say about that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, when I think of climate, I think of what you're talking about, Kathleen, about experts and trust. And I think aside from, a public health emergency, I think the climate is like the second thing that if we don't rely on the experts, who could we possibly rely on? So I deeply care about the climate. I totally agree with Lisa in terms of, like, to me, it's just such a given, which I think that is a generational divide of, like, our generation widely treats the climate change topic as such an obvious thing to take care of. I think that personally, like, also contributes to me having less political energy devoted to that, which is not going to help it be seen as an issue. But I think, in 2 to 3 generations, like, the climate change topic might be less political because it's such a given in this generation, and I think it will be such a given in the next generation. And then as we cycle through the generations, it'll be a fact that we all can't refute. Partly because it depends on time, and in 30 years, we're gonna see the evidence of it more than we see now. Though obviously the evidence exists today too.
Yeah, you will.
Virginia?
I'm kind of on the same page as Lisa. I don't really devote that much of my energy to being concerned with climate change. I feel like there's other issues that I tend to lean in, focus on.
May I ask what are the top 3 or 4 issues for you?
That's a tough one. I live in Appalachia, and it's definitely a very impoverished area, and improving the economy there is something that's very important to me. I think we have a major opioid crisis in America, and that's something that's very near and dear to me, with family members who have struggled and who have died, and it's very important to me that we address that. And then I think also the crisis at the border is another one that really concerns me, with issues like Laken Riley's death recently have become very concerning.
Right. Let me shift to what, for me as an old guy, is slightly uncomfortable. I began by talking about how Reagan was the oldest guy ever to run. He was significantly younger than either Trump or Biden today. Donald Trump's 77, Joe Biden's 81. If you combine their ages, that's 158. 158. If you combine the ages of the President of France and the Prime Minister of England, it's 89. So there's something going on in this country. When we were young, and Reagan was mocking the Soviets, because we thought he was old. The Soviet leaders, he used to say, "I want to meet with the leader of the Soviet Union. They keep dying on me." They did. They went through 3 or 4 or 5 while Reagan was president. He kept trying to meet with them, and they were all these fossils. And as a young American, we were laughing at them. But by the way, the United States of America is, depending on how you count it, but I would say 235 years old. You go to 1789, the Constitution. We're 235. That means, do the math, Trump or Biden have each been alive for 1/3 of all of American history. Gulp. Hamza, is that a deal breaker for you?
I mean, what choice do I have?
I don't know. No, but a combined age of 158 is something.
I wish I was voting for someone younger, but I don't have that choice, so it's not a deal breaker for me. I'm still going to vote for Joe Biden, and yeah, I guess that's my answer. It's not a deal breaker for me, though I don't love that they're that old. Obviously, no offense.
No, I have no offense. I just think, Rick, this is so interesting to watch, looking back on a long career, because I remember the first time Joe Biden ran for president, 1988. And go back and look at his speeches back then. He had an explicitly generational appeal. That's one of the reasons he failed. But his stump speech was all about how he was inspired by a hatless young man standing on the steps of the Capitol saying, "Ask not what your country." Kennedy had a generational appeal, and it worked. Biden tried to sort of inherit that as the next one, and it fell flat for a variety of reasons. But he didn't say that anymore. He didn't talk about the torch being passed to a new generation, right? And in fact, Eric Swalwell, a young congressman from California, ran against Biden for about 5 minutes and hit him right between the eyes with that, right to his face in a debate. read back his ancient speech and said, basically, dude, hand it off. Here I am. Now, he went nowhere with that, too. But Rick, don't you think it's kind of striking for those of us who have heard all these generational appeals all our lives, and now we have these two very, very old men?
Absolutely. And I agree with Hamza. I wish we had two other
what
candidates.
What can you do, though?
And, this round, but, that old phrase, we've met the enemy and the enemy is us. I don't know how true, because there are a lot of institutional aspects of this, but you really, we were meeting yesterday and we were talking about this, and there was a time, I think in the first Clinton-Trump election, where I had a good friend who was a very involved a Democrat in D.C., and we were talking about that election, and we both said, as the days were coming on, this is the first election I remember where people on both sides are saying, the candidate on the other side is the worst candidate, except for my own candidate. Like, both sides were sort of holding their nose about their candidate. And, this is too late in the day to talk about why those things are. But it is a grave issue that I think in terms of the character and what we're asking of our leaders, that we are not producing better leaders.
It's interesting.
Yeah, I also think I'm an outlier in this, in that I think the age is important. I think it's important to resonate and connect with your voters, but I don't think that age is a deal breaker. And I think the fact that if age is really the worst thing you can say about a candidate, I think that says something about the candidate. And Swalwell is my congressman, and he says that, would you rather have, so you can count someone's age, you can count someone's indictments, like you can count very many different things. But I think with Biden, like, I don't think the age thing doesn't really bother me. I think what's more important is just like mental fitness and being able to resonate with your voters. And I think as long as he has those two things, the age piece doesn't really affect me as much. Though I do think that it reflects something about American politics, which is that we have a lot of people who are really entrenched in those politics. I mean, Joe Biden's been around for a long time. And I think that that's actually served him and served the country greatly in many ways, because it's allowed him to, have so many bipartisan deals and really work with a lot of different people. But yeah, I think a lot of people are frustrated because it's like, why do we have people who've been around for so long who are still leading? But that doesn't really bother me as much.
Kathleen, what do you think?
Oh, I think Lisa's absolutely right. You can count a lot of things. And I would prefer somebody that I think it's time for a change. I disagree with Rick a little bit, and I must enjoy it because I do it often. So I think it is worth talking about why, and I think it's the problem with our political parties and how candidates are chosen. And we're not looking at that. And I think it's time we have a public dialogue about how both parties are choosing their candidates. That's why we are where we are today. And so, again, I'm with Lisa. I trust his moral competency. I also trust the kind of people he brings with him into office. Having worked in the civil service, I tend to vote party because I'm looking at all those political appointments that are going to be made up and down the line in those agencies where they're going to be making the decisions that truly do affect my life, right? Not that those larger ones don't. I think the Ukraine does affect my life, but in all those agencies, they're going to be staffing them with people of a particular moral and political philosophy, and those are the people I'm voting for when I'm voting for Biden, I guess, as well.
And both sides would say that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's...
Right, so we're back to institutions, at least from the boomers. Jim?
If I were a young person, I would be using the word gerontocracy. And I mean, I realize that Mitch McConnell's stepping down and Nancy Pelosi's stepping down, but you think about how old they are. Right. You go, how are we? Is their political system becoming sclerotic, physically as well as metaphorically? And is there enough mobility within the system, or is it so absolutely dependent upon the contacts and relationships that you accumulate along the way, and the chits you call in, and the ability to pick up the phone and talk to so and so, that there is just this huge inherent advantage of having been around and part of this system forever? And how does that affect the mobility and ability? How does that affect the ability of young people to break into the system?
What do you think?
Yeah, I think everybody's had valuable statements here. I agree that, it's hard voting for a candidate who doesn't really represent you. I mean, an older man is not necessarily the best representation of myself, but yeah, and going off your statement, I think, when I was working in DC, Mitch McConnell said something about, the House has all the young people and they're there and they're gung-ho, and then we have the Senate and we have all the old guys where we have the teacup and the saucer's there to cool it down. And I think there's value in that statement, but at the same time, I think there are things that need to change. And so I struggle with, with age there is wisdom, but we also worry about stagnancy in our government.
May I ask, especially the young people, are you more voting for something as someone or against something or someone? Kathleen sort of hinted at that when you said, well, I want this party, not that party, because of civil service control.
Well, and also the values of the two parties, I believe. I mean, the Republican Party now does not have a platform, so it's hard for me to speak to their values. But, yeah, it's values, too.
But so, Hamza, when you're voting, are you saying I'm for X, or you're saying I'm against Y?
I think the latter. I mean, I agree with what Kathleen said about the people that are coming with, and I guess I am voting for the people that Joe Biden will appoint and bring with him into office. But I think the whole argument and narrative now is vote against this person, save America. Mm-hmm. So I mean, I guess I've succumbed to that, and I agree that I'm voting for Joe Biden, but I'm voting more against Donald Trump, and I think that's what drives people to show up and cast their ballot.
Rick?
What question am I
Is
asking?
is your vote more an affirmative endorsement of A or a negative rejection of B?
I think it's a mix, and I think there are principles. I wish they were heightened, but there are principles that I'm conservative principles of. Well, what are I guess principles of these days? I would say relatively smaller government. I would say. Appreciation for how the rule of law is supposed to work, and the separation of powers, those issues. I don't have great confidence in the top side of either side. I think both parties, when they get in these days, there's sort of the fatal conceit of saying, I'm in power now, and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do whatever it takes. But so there are principles, and I agree with Kathleen that's what elections are for, and we are voting for more than the top person. But and I believe that there are values of the Republican Party reflects that are more reflective of some of the concerns I have, even about things like immigration or the border. And so I think it's a mix that you're both saying, I don't want those policies. And I think I'll get more of these if I vote this side. I think all of us do that.
Mm-hmm. Let me wrap with a separate question for each generation, and then open up to questions from the audience as well. For the boomers, I'm going to start with you, Jim. What do you wish you had known then that you know now? And by the way, for the young people, it's kind of the opposite. What do you want to tell yourself 40 years from now to never forget?
Jeez. I remember when I was 21 years old, I was supremely, arrogantly confident in myself and thought I knew it all. And I think going through life, one of the things you learn is that, no, you don't know it all. You know a lot less. You can gain a lot more humility after you've. I guess what do I wish I knew then? Almost everything.
That's great. Virginia? What do you want to say to yourself 40 years hence?
I think in 40 years that I hope I remember how strong I felt in my values now, and but not to become complicit in not accepting change. And developing my values as I grow and learning and changing with the times. I think that's something that I hope that I remember that I wanted to do.
I would say to myself, don't underestimate the importance of being able to know, to analyze your way to truth, to be able to listen to someone and know whether they're making sense, and to learn those skills. That is a skill set. So heads up, pay attention in your classes to learn how to think analytically.
Wow. My freshman year government at UT, the professor said the only reason to come to college is to develop a BS detector. I never forgot it.
I think something that I admire the most about this generation is our passion. I think this generation is very passionate about a variety of issues, and I think that that's really refreshing because a lot of the times it feels like politicians don't necessarily serve the people at some point. It feels like they serve a system, and I hope that 40 years from now I still have passion, and also bringing back to like the very first thing that I said, which is I hope that our generation can really cultivate a value of disagreement. And I hope that we're able to sit down with one another regardless of our backgrounds and just be able to have productive conversations. I hope that that's something that we can do 40 years from now, because I think that's the only way that we'll actually bring about change.
I think about something I had to learn along the way is, and it goes with your statement about passion, which I think I did have at the beginning, is also, I wish I learned more quickly the power of patience and diligence. Like to hold on, but it's going to take a while. And the patience and the humility of just saying, yeah, I'm contributing this much, but I am contributing, and not to be discouraged. And that's something I am very concerned that there's such a great cynicism and discouragement that exists now. But I think I had to learn that. I had to learn to grow up about saying, yeah, change is hard, and justice is hard. It takes a while.
And Hamza?
I think now I'm fairly critical of what I read, and I challenge and want to probe deeper into it, and I think we can all relate in that, like, that's a taxing thing to have to do, but I hope that I remain that critical about what I see and to question every headline and try to dig deeper and, like, I guess have the energy to keep doing that as I grow older.
It's really important. Getting back to Kathleen's original point, looking at primary sources. Like they say politician X said this, go and find her speech, see if she really, that's really going to be a useful life skill. Questions from our audience, or comments, or arguments? Yes.
Yeah, so my question is, do you think Biden is right when he continues to maintain he's the only person who can beat Trump as he's done it before, despite significant dissatisfaction in polling numbers? Or do you think he's put his own political ambition ahead of what people really do want?
Who wants to take that?
I mean, I would vote for anyone that had a D next to their name, so I disagree with that, with like Biden's assertion there, but
I think now is not a good time to try it out, to be honest. And like I think that's kind of how I feel about it. I think that there, maybe in a more robust primary system, there would be an alternative, but I also really like Joe Biden personally, so I'm happy to vote for him.
Yeah, I think it's a sacrifice on his part, actually. I think that's why he's running. I can't imagine, even at my age, I wouldn't want a job like that, right? And so I don't think he wants it either. He said it once that he didn't want it, and I think he stepped into the breach. And no one, we can fault him for being that old, but no one, including Swalwell, could get the kind of support that would make him feel free to step back, right? So I think personally it's a sacrifice, not ambition at all.
If any of the conservatives want to opine on that, feel free to.
I don't have anything good to say about either Trump or Biden.
Yeah, I'm kind of in the, well, that might have been a question some months ago, but at this point, whatever you want as an outcome in the election. I think Joe Biden's the only one who has a chance to beat Trump because it's Joe Biden. So
I think he's right.
You know.
Yes.
So my question is more for the more experienced generation. You all grew up and saw the rise of social media and how the internet impacted politics. I've recently been worried about the integration of AI into public sphere with regards to the political landscape as well. So what advice do you have for the younger generation navigating new technologies in the political sphere? Thank you.
Jim, as a journalist, do you want to start us off?
You know, I don't have a lot to say about the new technologies per se, although I think we're obviously going to launch into a whole new world that none of us can really begin to fathom what it's like now. So the thing that everyone needs to do, and it's been said before, is you need to cultivate the ability to analyze and think independently. Don't take anything on anybody's, just their pure say-so. My philosophy is almost distrust everything until you can have a chance to compare what someone on the other side says, or do your own research, or go back to the original documentation, and you just got to be able to think and analyze for yourself, and that'll just we're hurtling along at such a phenomenal rate, and we're talking with things that AI can do, particularly faking photographs and faking videos and faking everything else, and it's just going to be if we don't have our own we don't have our ability to maintain critical analysis, we're just all going to be sheep.
I think you have to educate yourself about the technology, not just use it. So you have to know, for example, that AI is limited to the data set that it's fed. All right? So just a little fact like that should educate you in your use of AI, which is now in terms of doing your homework, for example, right? So I think you have to be, there's that old book, The Medium is the Message. Do you remember that one?
Right, Marshall McLuhan.
Yeah. So I think that if you're going to use it, you have to use it like, this is a terrible thing to say, like people who are pro-guns, you know, if you're going to own a gun, you have to know how to use it or you're going to die. I think that's true of the way our media is going. I think you also have to be really sensitive to those people who talk about what a waste of time it is. And so you have to have a strong sense of what the meaning in your life is about and how you obtain that meaning. And is that what you're getting when you're online? And so, you know, you were reading all the stories about that and staring at your phone and all that. So I think you have to develop maybe more than we ever had to. You had to have a fine sense of where life's meaning comes from. And you have to be really educated about the technology. Maybe I should say like driving a car instead of owning a gun. You know, you can't just hop in and roar down the road with it. And that's what a lot of people are doing. They're just kind of bouncing around on it and consuming it. And a lot of it's, at best, malnutrition, and at worst, it's trash, poisonous.
I agree with the outcomes or the conclusions that Kathleen had, but I don't agree. This is an area that is of grave concern to me. I don't think that AI is just limited to the data sets. And if you look at there's a lot of great, very recent books, like artificial generative intelligence is where the function actually leaves behind the data sets and now develops its own techniques of strategy. There's a great book called The Coming Wave, which is it explains what are we talking about. And so, but I agree with everything Kathleen said and what Jim said. It raises the stakes and especially what's at stake with just trusting small bits of information that you're seeing on the web. And whether it's the week before an election or because we're getting inundated with sources of stuff that's telling us the stuff all the time, it's going to be much harder. Your generation will be much better at it if you're asking this question. That's a critical thing. I'd also like to say one other thing that I think is really important here, and that is You know, one of the outcomes of this, which is frightening, is that we'll look at all this stuff and we say, I can't trust anything. And there's a label that I've seen associated with this. It's called the liar's dividend. And the liar's dividend says those who are behind wanting you to think something false win, either if you believe something false or you believe nothing is trustworthy. That's the liar's dividend, because you distrust everything. And that is I think that's a grave fear for a democracy. And the way to go at that, I think it's going to be a grave challenge, but it's going to require the kind of tenacious commitment to verifying what the sources that we can trust, and then not giving in to cynicism. I think that's a grave challenge, and an essential one for life and for democracy.
That's well put. If I may weigh in as well. First off, has anybody here had a class from Siva Vaidyanathan in the American Studies Department? You have?
I have too.
You have? Mm-hmm. I went to college with him. He went to class. I went to bars. Siva is a huge brain and is a real expert on this. So everything I know about it is derivative of Siva. So if you've had his class, seriously, you should all take it. I'm not trying to just like flack for my buddy, but he's remarkable. And he's helped me understand this. And my own theory is every means of communication develops its own new epistemology, its own new politics for my world, right? So Herr Gutenberg invents movable type, the first printing press. He does it, AMDG, ad majorem Dei gloriam, for the greater glory of God through the Holy Mother Catholic Church. First thing he prints is a Bible. What happens?
Reformation.
The Reformation, the Enlightenment. These are catastrophes in the Vatican's eyes. It killed the Catholic Church's hegemony over Western thought. He didn't mean to do that, but he sure enough did it, okay? Lincoln was the president who mastered the lightning. They didn't call it the telegraph back then. They called it the lightning, because in an instant, information could move faster than 3 miles an hour. Before railroads and the telegraph, that's as fast. When Mr. Jefferson founded this school, information could only move at 3 miles an hour. That's a person on horseback carrying news from Philadelphia to Monticello. Okay, the lightning, all of a sudden, Lincoln could sit in the War Department and know precisely how Grant was doing in the Tennessee campaign. It was unimaginable. So he used it to knit the country together. Because all of a sudden, like, you know, Vermont could know what's going on in California. So he used that to make us one nation. That was a completely different kind of politics. Then comes radio. Lincoln had a high, reedy, squeaky, horrible voice. He would have been a catastrophe on the radio. He'd have never gone anywhere. But Roosevelt, with his beautiful, mellifluous voice, and he was unbelievably verbal, he masters radio. Could FDR have existed under television? Not a chance. He was an ugly guy in a wheelchair when we had real prejudice against people with disabilities. Okay, there's no way he succeeds in television. Who does? JFK and Reagan. A movie star and a guy who looks like a movie star. TV rewards visual images, right? The medium today, social media, is where you get your news. Siva, I think, would tell you this. Is what I've learned from them. Those companies are full of neuroscientists, and they have weaponized your amygdala against you, because their job is to take your attention. And what keeps you on that platform is what they will give you. And they know what keeps you on the platform is the divisive, the dishonest, the angry, the hateful, exploitive, because that's how we're wired. That's our biological. If you were like with your clan 50,000 years ago and somebody showed up who looked really different from you, very good idea to kill him. He's probably there to kill you or to rape or steal your goats or whatever. But then something happened. Really, human civilization and religion and philosophies where every good philosophy, every good religion begins with treat other people well, especially if they're different from you. Because that's like the tension. Social media is now reversing that, taking us right back to here's something that will make you angry and will keep you on our platform. And so that creates a completely different kind of politics. I think some of the people who are particularly young members of Congress would have never gone anywhere pre-social media. And now because they can tweet, they can raise money, they can, you know. So I'm serious, you really need to be aware of this. And it's, to me, the central challenge of your generation is you've got an information system that is designed to divide and to anger and to lie for profit. It's not that they're left or right. They don't care. They just want to keep you on their platform. And it is, I'm sorry to preach like that, but you guys are going to have to, you all are going to have to fix this because my generation doesn't have the slightest idea, except for Professor Vaidyanathan. Any other questions or comments? Somebody's pointing. Wait. Oh, there you are. Hi.
Hello. A large portion of your guys' conversation was surrounding polarization and, the essence of the media. But how would necessarily, this problem be solved within this generation? I want to hear some advice from the older generation and also from the younger. And just wondering, how do we navigate this going forward? Because this isn't a problem that is going to stop immediately after, a certain election. And I just wanted to see your guys' solutions on that necessarily, if you have any.
Solutions to the polarization.
The polarization.
Throw away your smartphones.
Yeah. In the time span, 18 months from 71 to 72, there were 5 domestic terrorist attacks a day. Nobody remembers it. Thank God there weren't as many fatalities. It was mostly not mostly, it was just, mostly, almost exclusively the far left. They were blowing up ROTC buildings. They even they're trying to bomb the Pentagon. And polarization was as bad then, I think, looking back on it. I mean, I don't really remember it, but as it is now. But we were able to get through it. My own advice? Well, we quote my hero and political mentor, President Clinton. When young people ask him for advice, he says, try as many things outside of your comfort zone as you can and get to know as many people as you can who are different from you. Because I have family members who are big for Trump. I'm not so big for Trump, okay? But I love them, and if you can't know, respect, and love someone who's for Biden or for Trump, you got no business being in a democracy. So, I mean, I think that's the most important thing is find people outside of your comfort zone, find experiences outside of your comfort zone, and I actually think your generation is really, really good at that, at putting yourselves out a lot more than mine did. But my urgent concern is that you not try to censor, cancel all the things that conservatives, I think rightly, criticize the illiberal left for. Because I've never learned anything from a vigorous agreement. I need to be around people who are different from me.
I've also never learned anything from a fight. And so I think this is where institutions come back in. Mm-hmm. And that is, I'm in the religious studies department. Let me make a pitch for one of the things that's affecting us is the weakness of our religious institutions and the lack of interest in them. Because religions are churches, synagogues, mosques are part of the apparatus of a democratic state. They are voluntary associations of like-minded people. And the like-mindedness is they are committed to something that is other than politics. And so they may have a range of political positions, but they're all gathered together because they love something else. You can think of love in artistic ways, the love of your art. You can think of it in terms of the presence of the divine, but it is nonetheless, you have some orientation to something that's bigger than what you're reading on social media. All those people are, in some respects, I think the problem is too many people are caring about politics today. And that's the lack of trust. We have to figure we have to do it for ourselves because we can't trust anybody who's talking to us. Used to be you could forget about Washington for a while, right? That's what we paid them for. You go do this, like the person who does my taxes. I'm not going to sit and think about my taxes all year because you're going to do my taxes. I send you to Washington. You're going to think about this, and I get to forget about it for a while. Well, right now, we're being told to care about things we should not be caring about. We ought to be able to trust on some level. But irrespective of that, shouldn't say irrespective, we need to care about something larger than ourselves. And politics is not larger than ourselves, I don't think. And that's one thing that religion can give you. And so I think that, yes, you find a voluntary society. If it's badminton, so be it. But religion, that's what religion does. It talks about moral meanings. It organizes people in ways that teach them. You talk about learning how to be a civil society. Religion teaches you how to be civil. Although some people, when they're outside of their religion, even though they're religious, they act uncivil. I haven't quite figured that one out. But nonetheless, I recommend y'all, this is where you find good dates as well, if that's what you're interested in. I recommend you find a congregation, a group of people that give you some respite from social media, political strife, and all those things. And you talk about something else that gives you meaning in your life.
That's beautiful.
We may have disagreed on some things tonight. I could not agree with you more. And I also, and you know, this is one of, sometimes, you know, an answer seems so basic, but it's actually a profound answer. This idea that, Paul, that you said before, we've come to the place where we say, I'm right and you're evil, or where we say, I know you because I know a fact about you. We are denying the humanity of that person. And faith, for me, insists on the humanity of every person in this room. And so I can really disagree. And I have friends and family, Paul, who I really disagree with on things. I love them. And even people I don't know. I mean, this is such a great conversation for us to have, because even people we don't know, we can say, do I respect you as a person? And am I going to start with the presumption that even though you disagree with me on some fundamental thing, your desire is for the good? I'll start with that presumption. You can prove me wrong. And I hope you'll give me that grace. Right now, we're not doing that. And I'm afraid we're, you know, this sort of the acceleration of information, the acceleration of division. You know, this Jonathan Haidt article in Atlantic this week about how phones, since the rise of cell phones, but just technology, has segregated and made us depressed, especially Gen Z, is focuses and enhances this idea of separation and naming and separating. And instead of saying, we're in this together and you are worthy of my respect because you are a person. You know, what I would say is you're made in the image of God. And so if we abandon that, as it's great to have a conversation at the University of Virginia about a fundamental truth, respecting our brothers and sisters. And I think that's the way out.
I think that's our way out. I can't think of a better way to end it. Thank you very much, everybody, from all sides of the political spectrum and all sides of the generational divides in this country, for a fascinating conversation. I can't thank you all enough. Thank you.